The theme of education in Betty Smith's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Education plays a key role in our everyday lives and is a prominent theme in Betty Smith's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Throughout the book, we see many different characters, all with different values and personalities. This is shown clearly in the Romilly family, composed of Katie, the mother, Johnny, the father, and Francie and Neely, their children. Mary Romilly, Katie's mom, as well as Johnny and Katie, all agree that education is the best way for the children to live their best life. This is shown in multiple parts of the book. But many people during this time period did not realize that education was free and available for all. So it was extremely smart the Romillys took advantage of their resources to better educate their children. As Francie's education increases, she feels more ostracized from students and friends her age. She likes to talk about Shakespeare and educational topics, something unusual for her age. Francie uses her education to grow throughout the novel.
Redlining started back in the 1930s and is still an issue today. The 1974 Supreme Court case Milliken v. Bradley, the court ruled that the school districts did not have to integrate among each other if the district lines weren't drawn with racist intent. Still today, we are increasingly isolating impoverished children of color in segregated schools, both public and charter. Also, residential segregation between cities is getting worse, and Supreme Court in the 1974 case said surrounding cities could not be forced in the school's integration plans. Justice Thurgood Marshall wrote in his dissent, the decision meant school district lines, however innocently drawn, will surely be perceived as fences to separate the races. Research by Cornell sociologist Daniel Litcher shows that segregation between white families and non-white families has actually changed very little since the 1980s. In fact, while segregation within cities has gotten slightly better, segregation between municipalities has gotten worse. In other words, there is probably less segregation within the neighborhoods of your town, but there's probably more segregation in the comparing your own town and neighboring one.
In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in Plessy v. Ferguson that racially segregated public facilities were legal, so long as the facilities for blacks and whites were equal. This prevented black people from sharing the same buses, schools, and other public facilities as whites, known as Jim Crow laws. Unfortunately, these lasted 6 decades until the year of 1954. Brown v. Board of Education, 1954 Supreme Court case, in which the justices ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. Brown v. Board of Education stated that separate but equal education and other services were not, in fact, equal at all. Brown v. Board of Education was in 1954, and even though it was illegal to have things separate, no one changed the way they lived, and the president at the time, Eisenhower, did nothing to enforce the law. We know that after these many things happened, like Montgomery bus boycott from 1955 to 1956, the Little Rock Nine, and Greensboro sit-in, freedom rides, the March on Washington. This shows that even though segregation was illegal, Brown v. Board of Education did not do much to change the South.
There were many quotes that illustrated the theme of education throughout the novel. One example is, "My grandparents never knew how to read or write. Those who came before them couldn't read or write. My mother's sister can't read or write. My parents never even graduated from grade school. I never went to high school, but I am Frances K. Nolan and now in college. Do you hear that, Francie? You're in college." Another example is, "But I do not want this child to grow up just to work hard. What must I do, Mother? What must I do to make a different world for her? How do I start? The secret lies in the reading and the writing. You are able to read every day. You must read 1 page from some good book to your child. Every day this must be until the child learns to read. Then she must read every day. I know this is the secret. I will read," promised Katie. These quotes are significant because during this time period, if you were poor, it was very unlikely that children from poverty-riven households were to attend and graduate high school, let alone college. I believe this is a very big accomplishment for Francie and the entire Nolan family.
I'm going to speak to the progress of the federal government from the mid-20th century to present. In his State of the Union, Lyndon B. Johnson proposed a legislation that was unofficially dubbed the War on Poverty. This proposal was in response to the fact that in 1964, the poverty rate was at 19% with his presidency. Johnson saw an opportunity for change. Many bills were passed to improve general social services and more associated to the topics at hand, education. Some of these include, but are not limited to, the creation of the Office of Economic Opportunity, the Food Stamp Act of 1964, the Social Security Act of 1965, Project Head Start in 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, and the Higher Education Act of 1965. The last two I will go more in depth with. The ESEA was a statute that funded primary and secondary education, which aimed to shorten the achievement gaps between students, providing each child with an equal opportunity to education. The act was reauthorized several times since 1965, sometimes after the expiration date, most notably in 2002 by President George W. Bush, in which case it was known as the No Child Left Behind Act, and President Barack Obama in 2015, where it was rebranded as Every Student Succeeds Act. Moving to Higher Education Act, the Pell Grant was one of the results of this. The Pell Grant helps me personally because, according to the state and federal standards, my family and I are below the poverty line, and I most likely would not be able to afford to attend Geneseo without it. The Pell Grant is a subsidy the U.S. federal government provides for students usually pursuing their first bachelor's degree who need it to pay to go to a university. It was originally known as the Basic Educational Opportunity Grant and renamed after Claiborne Pell, who sponsored the bill that reformed the now Pell Grant in 1972. The grant is generally regarded to be the basis of a student's financial aid package when they apply for FAFSA. It is a grant which does not need to be repaid and is given based on financial need and eligibility determined by the U.S. Department of Education.
A few other examples from the novel are: an answer came to Katie. It was so simple that a flash of astonishment that felt like pain shot through her head. Education. That was it. It was education that made the difference. Education would pull them out of the grime and the dirt. Ah, that's what Mary Romley, her mother, had been telling her all those years. Only her mother did not have the one clear word, education. With that money, our troubles would be over, thought Francie. We could pay rent on a 3-bedroom flat somewhere. Mama wouldn't have to go out to work, and Lori wouldn't be left alone so much. This is Katie's epiphany. The education is the way out of poverty. From this moment forth, Katie is even more adamant that the kids get through high school. It signifies that education was about more than education. It was a way to turn their life around.
In conclusion, education was an extremely important theme in the book. Education was constantly changing and evolving in the United States of America, and urbanization also played a great role. Topics such as important court cases, redlining, and more were discussed because of the race, class issues, and prejudice subtly involved in education. Although our system is not perfect, as we heard from our present-day example, we are moving in the correct direction of equal education for all. The more we are aware of this injustice, the more likely we will correctly fix it.
I will be speaking on the NCLB No Child Left Behind Act and how, despite an increase in technology and resources, there is still inequality in the way the resources are distributed among schools. The law is the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Act. NCLB was replaced by the Every Student Succeed Act in 2015. Under the 2002 law, states are required to test students in reading and math in grades 3 to 8 and once in high school. All students are expected to meet or exceed state standards in reading and math by 2014. The major focus of the No Child Left Behind Act is to close student achievement gaps by providing all children with a fair, equal, and significant opportunity to obtain a high-quality education. The U.S. Department of Education emphasizes 4 pillars within the bill: accountability, to ensure those students who are disadvantaged achieve academic proficiency; flexibility, which allows school districts flexibility in how they use federal education funds to improve student achievement; research-based education, which emphasizes educational programs and practices that have been proven effective through scientific research; and parent options, which increases the choices available to the parents of students attending the Title I schools. According to an article written by Aubrey Waters, Black, Latino, and Native students are less likely to have access to high-level math and science courses. They are underrepresented in gifted and talented programs. They are underrepresented in AP courses. Black, Latino, and Native American students are also more likely to attend schools with high concentrations of inexperienced teachers. They're more likely to attend schools where teachers have not met all state certification requirements. 87% of white students graduate on time, 76% of Latino students, and 73% of Black students do. End quote. In many schools and institutions, we see the upper class schools have better access to the better programs and latest technology, in which then allows for the students to develop better and get better opportunities in life. Schools with students from a poorer background find it hard to get the funds required to supply the students with things that they could help further advance their education. Because of this, many of these poorer education students are forced to host fundraisers if they want a chance at any of these things. I myself am a child of immigrant-turned citizens, both fortunate enough to come from a rigorous background which enabled me to get into programs that help to provide positive opportunities to level up my education. I'm a transfer student. Before coming to Geneseo, I went to a CUNY school in Queens, York College. The school was located in an area that wasn't the cleanest or the most friendly, but the professors themselves were very intelligent. The main problem was that a lot of programs were funded by the students. There were many fundraisers hosted by the students in order to have things that we needed to further educate ourselves and to further promote ourselves. Because we were in a neighborhood that wasn't the best, it was hard for people to understand that it was a good school with hardworking students and professors despite its outward appearance. I made the decision to transfer to Geneseo after finding out how well known the biology program was and how good the school was in general. Thankfully, I was accepted, and this opened up a door to many opportunities that your college couldn't.